You ever have one of those moments where you're standing in a room full of people, and suddenly you realize they've never really seen you? Not for who you are. Not for what you're capable of. Just for the version of you they thought they could keep small. This story is for anyone who's ever been laughed at, brushed off, or underestimated, and then decided not to explain themselves anymore. If you've ever had to remind someone silently exactly who you are, then stay right here. And while you're here, drop a like if you've ever felt the quiet fire inside. Hit subscribe if you want more stories that don't shout, but still speak volumes. And hey, I'm always curious, what city are you watching from? Because this one's about the power of showing up and letting your silence do all the talking. Here's what happened. It was supposed to be a relaxed Sunday brunch. The kind where sunlight spills through the lace curtains, the scent of cinnamon rolls drifts through the air, and conversations float easily between sips of coffee and clinks of cutlery. My aunt's house, with its perfectly ironed napkins and Pinterest-worthy table settings, always had the charm of warmth. But beneath the polished smiles and family photos hung in symmetrical frames, the air was thick with something else: comparison, competition, and the sharp bite of backhanded compliments. Olivia was the queen of that particular sport. She arrived fashionably late, as always, heels clicking against the hardwood like the opening notes of a performance. Her entrance was deliberate. She wanted eyes on her, and she got them. Scarlet lipstick that could stop traffic, oversized sunglasses she didn't bother removing indoors, and a Gucci belt so prominently displayed you'd think it had its own PR manager. Her coat, some designer number I'd never cared to identify, slid off her shoulders with practiced ease as she greeted the room like she was walking a red carpet. Everyone else faded into the background. That was her gift. But she didn't stop at soaking in the attention. No, she needed a target. And I was sitting right there. I'd chosen my outfit with no fanfare that morning. A beige cardigan that had seen a few winters, a pair of high-waisted thrifted Levi's that hugged my waist just right, and ankle boots with creases at the toes, honest wear from years of city walking. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I came for coffee, not a catwalk. Still, the moment Olivia's eyes locked on me, I could feel the shift, the gleam of amusement in her gaze like a blade being sharpened. "Oh my God," she said, loud enough for the entire table to pause their forks midair. "Naomi, you look so basic." Her laugh followed before I could even process the words, a sharp, high-pitched trill that danced on the edge of cruelty. "Is that H&M or Target? Or did you dig that up from a clearance graveyard?" The room responded the way it always did. An awkward chuckle from my aunt, a stifled giggle from a younger cousin who always echoed Olivia like a shadow, and then the worst sound of all, silence, the kind that confirmed complicity. I smiled. The tight-lipped kind that hides the way your cheeks burn and your chest feels like it's folding in on itself. "It's just something I threw on," I replied casually, as though my heart hadn't sunk like a stone. But something had shifted inside me. It wasn't just about the clothes. It never was. Olivia had always had a way of cutting people down with a smile. As kids, it was the way she pointed out my crooked teeth when I laughed. In high school, it was the way she'd ask, "Is that what you're wearing?" before every family function. And now, at 26, I realized the pattern hadn't changed, just the stakes, and I'd allowed it for far too long. That day, as I picked at my fruit salad and sipped lukewarm coffee, I wasn't just embarrassed. I was angry. Not the kind of rage that explodes. No, this was quieter, steadier, the kind that simmers low and slow until it becomes something sharper. I studied Olivia as she leaned back in her chair, basking in the moment. She was good at this, wielding her insecurities like weapons, dressing them in silk and sarcasm. She didn't mock because she was strong. She mocked because it made her feel bigger than she was. It was never about me, not really. It was about the fact that I refused to play her game. But maybe it was time I did, just once. Not by clapping back with another insult, not by stooping to her level. No, I had something else in mind. I didn't know what it would be just yet, but I knew one thing with clarity I hadn't felt in years. This time, I wouldn't swallow the humiliation like I always did. This time, I'd make her feel it. Not with anger, but with elegance. And maybe, just maybe, when the tables turned, she wouldn't even know how it happened. But she'd feel it. And she wouldn't be laughing. People tend to overlook quiet women. They think we don't see, don't hear, don't calculate, but we do. We're just not performing for the room. We're taking notes in the background while everyone else plays loud and messy in the spotlight. That's how I've always moved. Silently, steadily, and with purpose that didn't need applause. In my family, being loud was currency. Being seen was everything. Olivia had mastered it from the age of 13, pouty selfies with just the right filter, fashion hauls with brand tags prominently displayed, captions that walked the line between humble brag and runway-ready declarations. She curated her identity like a brand ambassador waiting for a deal, and it worked, at least on the surface. Me? I was the girl who helped optimize those brand campaigns behind the curtain. I built my digital marketing career with the same quiet intensity I did everything else. I didn't need to scream about success. I coded it into ads, buried it in UX copy, wove it through Instagram growth strategies for people like Olivia, people who needed followers to breathe. While she obsessed over how many likes she got for her outfit of the day posts, I was in the back end of platforms, analyzing how those likes translated into conversions. While she was choosing outfits for brunch, I was coordinating influencer seeding campaigns for brands 3 tiers above the ones she could afford. And in the process, I found myself consulting for a growing number of fashion tech startups, lean, creative teams trying to disrupt the industry with AI-powered styling tools, ethical sourcing, niche e-commerce platforms. I worked late nights under dim light with a hoodie on and my hair tied up. Not because I had something to prove to the world, but because building something meaningful always mattered more to me than dressing the part. Then came Revive, a small startup with an ambitious goal: to modernize luxury fashion through digital customization. Think high fashion meets personalization. No loud logos, no fast fashion, no influencer gimmicks. Just clean design, sharp silhouettes, and pieces that whispered wealth without shouting it. I joined their digital growth team on a freelance contract. At first, it was just pitch decks and email strategy. Then came the partnership planning. I sat in on meetings, typed minutes, cleaned up pitch language, and slowly, as they realized I actually had a pulse for the industry, I was invited to contribute creatively. When I heard the name Madison Blake dropped in one of the brainstorming sessions, I felt my heart skip. Not in a starstruck way, but in that quiet, oh wow, this is real kind of way. Madison wasn't just a designer, she was a force, a recluse in a world obsessed with exposure, a woman who turned down red carpets and interviews in favor of letting her designs speak. She hadn't done a custom design for anyone in years. Even celebrities wore off-the-rack Blake or nothing at all. So when she agreed to a collaborative capsule with Revive, it felt like the industry had tilted slightly on its axis. My job was to help map the narrative strategy for the launch. We were building something that didn't just rely on status but on the emotion of understated elegance, the kind of presence that doesn't enter a room loudly, but changes the air when it does. I worked hard, obsessively, to perfect the tone of our messaging, the sequence of release, the visual story behind each sketch. Madison noticed. A week after our internal launch preview, I received an email from her. No assistant, no manager, just her. Naomi, I've been watching the way you shape things, quietly, without ego, with precision. Your instincts are rare. If you ever want something made just for you, consider this an open invitation. Stay silent, stay strong. M. I remember sitting there for a long moment, staring at that message, reading it twice, 3 times. It wasn't just about a dress. It was recognition, from someone who never handed it out. It was a nod from the mountaintop. I never told anyone about the message. Not my colleagues, not my parents, not even my best friend. Especially not Olivia. I wasn't interested in showing off. The offer meant more as a symbol than a product. I tucked it away in the back of my mind, not as a weapon, but as a gift I wasn't ready to open. Until that brunch. Until Olivia's laughter ricocheted off the walls and sliced straight through my self-restraint. Until I looked around the table and realized no one would defend me, because they'd all bought into the same lie, that quiet meant unremarkable, that simple meant less than, that fashion was something you wore, not something you built. That day, I stopped thinking of Madison's offer as a treasure to keep hidden. That day, I started thinking of it as a card I'd earned, and one I was finally ready to play. The invitation came printed on black velvet textured cardstock with gold foil trim, as if the very paper knew its own importance. The Fairchild Foundation Charity Gala, hosted by my uncle's law firm, one of those sleek, performative events where everyone sipped overpriced wine while pretending to care about causes they couldn't define. The kind of room where image was everything and outfits were less about personal expression and more about silent power plays. Olivia had been posting about it for days. Albie and Blake, obviously, she had typed in our family group chat, the message punctuated by a wink emoji and a candid of her trying on a flowing crimson gown that, despite its sheen, was clearly borrowed from an older collection. Vintage, she added. So rare, so exclusive. I watched the messages roll in, the gasps, the admiration, the low-key envy, and I said nothing. Not a word. Because the real power, I was learning, wasn't in flexing what you had. It was in letting the silence build until it broke people in two. For 2 weeks, I kept everything to myself. I didn't tell anyone I was going. I didn't post a mirror selfie. I didn't even RSVP through the family thread. I went quiet, and quiet, I found, makes people nervous, especially Olivia. The night of the gala, the air buzzed with artificial warmth and diamond-drenched small talk. The hotel ballroom had been transformed into a golden cocoon. Chandeliers like glass stalactites, violins humming softly from a raised dais, and tables draped in ivory linen, each centerpiece a twisted, blooming sculpture of orchids and light. I arrived deliberately late, 10 minutes after the dinner had started, long enough that the chatter had settled, the seats mostly filled, and the focus had shifted to the first speaker's introductory remarks. I stood for a second at the edge of the ballroom, letting the moment breathe. Then I stepped in. Midnight blue, the gown clung and moved like water, liquid silk with an architectural shoulder line that sliced through the air with elegance. An asymmetrical neckline framed my collarbone, where a single hand-stitched detail glimmered just faintly under the lights. MB, not a logo, not a brand scream, just a whisper, a signature, a truth. It took only a few steps for the atmosphere to ripple, a turned head here, a pause in conversation there. The music didn't stop, but something in the room did. Even the clinking of glasses dulled. People didn't know what they were reacting to, only that they were reacting. Then I saw her. Olivia, seated at a table near the stage, laughing mid-sentence with one of my uncles. Her glass of champagne was tilted in her hand, her posture effortlessly open, her crimson Blake gown draped just so to highlight her curves. She looked as she always did, prepared to be the most admired woman in the room. Until her eyes found me. The smile stalled on her face. Her hand froze, halfway through brushing her hair back behind her ear. The glass didn't quite make it to her lips. In that moment, her expression was a glitch, a frozen frame between poise and disbelief. She blinked. And then someone behind her whispered, just loud enough to travel across the silk and gold silence. "Wait, is that a custom Blake?" Another gasp, then a murmur, like wind through a wheat field, gentle but unmistakable. Olivia didn't answer. She couldn't. Because every molecule in that room knew the truth. This dress wasn't vintage. It wasn't off the rack. It wasn't pulled from a stylist's forgotten closet. It was new, unique, one of one. And it was on me. A woman brushed past, her bracelet lightly grazing my arm. "Stunning," she said in passing, eyes still locked on the dress. "It has that Blake structure, but I haven't seen this piece before." I smiled softly. "You haven't," I said. As I made my way across the floor, a quiet path parted before me. No shouting, no announcing, just a shift, a surrender of attention. Eyes followed. Mouths whispered. Olivia remained frozen, her posture still textbook perfect, but her expression betrayed her. Her lips parted slightly, not to speak, but because the mask was cracking. She wasn't confused. She was undone. This was her world, and I had just rewritten the rules, not with noise, not with pettiness, with presence. I didn't gloat. I didn't stare her down. I didn't even break stride. I simply passed her table with the kind of poise Olivia had spent a lifetime trying to manufacture. And for the first time I could remember, she didn't meet my eyes. Because deep down she knew. She hadn't lost to someone louder. She had lost to someone better dressed in silence. She approached like someone walking toward a mirror they weren't ready to look into. Each step hesitant, measured, as if the floor beneath her were shifting and she couldn't trust her balance. Her smile, that signature Olivia smirk, polished and practiced, faltered before it even reached her eyes. She was rattled, and I was still. I stood beneath the ballroom chandelier, a flute of untouched champagne in my hand, the silk of my gown draped perfectly against my frame. I didn't shift. I didn't adjust. I didn't blink. In that moment, I had become the still point in a spinning room, and Olivia, for once, was the one spinning. "Where did you get that dress?" she asked, her voice coated in strained politeness, but the edge beneath was unmistakable. Her eyes flicked up and down the fabric like she was trying to decode it, searching for some detail that would confirm this was all a coincidence, a lucky find, a fluke. I tilted my head, let the silence bloom between us before answering. "Oh, this?" I said, letting the softness of the moment hold for a breath. "Just something I threw on." Her lips twitched, almost imperceptibly, but I caught it. That tiny muscle spasm of disbelief. A tell. She knew I was toying with her, but she didn't know how to respond without unraveling further. "You're lying," she said, more sharply this time. Her tone had dropped the mask. It wasn't a question. It was a demand, the kind of tone someone uses when they're no longer in control and are desperate to pretend otherwise. I let my eyes linger on her gown. It really was lovely, but next to mine it felt tired, familiar, like a song that had played too many times at too many weddings. I met her gaze with calm, clinical precision. "You seem to know so much about fashion," I said. "You tell me." She opened her mouth, closed it, blinked once hard, the kind of blink that's meant to push something back, to reset composure. But there was nothing to reset. Not anymore. And then she turned away. Not in a dramatic swirl or flounce, just a quiet pivot, like someone retreating from a room that had grown too bright to stay in. I didn't chase her with my eyes. I didn't revel or smirk or exchange knowing glances with anyone else. I simply sipped my champagne, slowly, elegantly, as if nothing had happened, because to me it hadn't. The moment had passed, and I was still standing, untouched, unbothered. Later, I caught a sliver of conversation. Olivia had ducked near the coach room with one of her orbiting companions, a girl who always mirrored Olivia's fashion and never questioned her opinion. But this time, her voice held something different, a new tone. "I thought Madison stopped doing customs," Olivia whispered, barely audible, but my ears had trained themselves over the years to recognize her voice even in a crowd. There was a pause. Then the girl replied, "Maybe she just doesn't do them for you." It was casual, innocent even, but it landed like a slap. I felt the air tighten around it. Olivia didn't respond. She didn't need to. The silence that followed said everything. That sentence, that simple observation, it rewrote the hierarchy Olivia had worked her entire life to maintain. Because in our world, our family, our circles, clothes weren't just fabric. They were a language. They whispered status, power, proximity. Olivia had always spoken the loudest. Tonight, I'd written a new dialect. I should have felt bad. That's what society tells us to do, feel guilty when we shift the balance, when we outshine someone who's used to eclipsing others. Especially if they're family, especially if they're women. We're told that pride in our own radiance must come with a disclaimer. But I didn't feel bad. Not for 1 second. Because Olivia's mockery at brunch wasn't just about clothes. It was about hierarchy. It was about humiliation. It was about reinforcing the unspoken roles we were all expected to play, and mine had always been the supporting act. She had publicly dismissed me, belittled me, laughed at me. Not as a joke, not as banter, but as a performance, and for years I had let her. Not anymore. Tonight wasn't revenge. It wasn't petty, it was simply accurate. The balance correcting itself, the truth asserting its place in the room. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to gloat. All I had to do was stand in that gown, sharp-lined and soft-spoken, just like me, and let the silence speak for itself. And as Olivia disappeared back into the crowd, eyes lowered, shoulders tight, I realized something else. She hadn't lost because I'd won. She had lost because, for once, I hadn't backed down. And that silence, that was the sound of my power. It started before I even had my first coffee. A soft chime from my phone, then another. Then another. I blinked awake to a screen overflowing with notifications, mentions, tags, DMs from people I hadn't spoken to in years, acquaintances, stylists, mutuals I barely remembered following, the common thread, the photo. One shot taken in passing by a blogger with a decent lens and a good eye. The ballroom light had caught the curve of my gown perfectly, the subtle shimmer of the midnight silk, the gold thread of MB glinting just beneath my collarbone. I wasn't even posing. I was caught mid-step, my profile half-turned, gaze forward. But the image had something Olivia's thousands of selfies never did. Presence. The blog's caption read, "Who is this woman in Blake? We've confirmed it's a custom, and not just a revival piece." The tailoring? Unmistakable. The message? Understated power. Understated power. That phrase curled around my spine like armor. I didn't repost it. I didn't tag Madison. I didn't even comment. But others did. And by noon, the real shock landed. Madison reposted the image herself, not to a private circle, not in a story that would vanish. A permanent grid post. 3 million followers. Her caption was brief. "True elegance isn't loud, it's undeniable." No tag, no explanation, just the image, the message, the truth. And that was the moment it became something else. No longer just a dress, no longer just a family drama. It became a shift, a quiet revolution made of silk and posture and restraint. Olivia never said a word, no apology, no dig, no congratulatory backhanded compliment, just silence. The kind of silence that says more than 1,000 apologies ever could. From that day forward, she stopped commenting on my clothes. She stopped performing her dominance in front of me. She didn't stop being Olivia. She still posted her outfits, still chased the next trend, still attended every gallery opening with a branded clutch under her arm. But with me, she stepped carefully. And I didn't change who I was, not to spike the moment, not to capitalize on the exposure. That would have made me just another player in the game Olivia lived in. No, I kept being me. Some days I showed up in thrifted blazers and jeans with frayed seams, a tote bag slung over one shoulder, hair tied back with a plain silk ribbon. Other days I wore fitted pieces from designers no one had heard of, artful, raw-edged garments crafted by hands that still cared more about form than fame. The clothes didn't matter. It was the way I wore them. Because something had shifted inside me that night, not loud, not explosive, but absolute. I no longer dressed to prove a point, or to disarm Olivia, or to deflect judgment before it landed. I dressed like someone who owed no one an explanation, and it showed. People noticed. Not in the way they noticed Olivia, not with flurries of likes or swarmy compliments from people trying to get something out of her orbit, but with something better. Real connection, genuine curiosity. "Your style feels so intentional," someone once said at a networking event. Like it's not trying to be noticed, it just is. That became my North Star. And it extended beyond clothes. In meetings, I spoke only when I had something to say, and when I did, people leaned in. I no longer filled silences nervously. I let them breathe. I no longer tried to outpace the room with volume. I waited until the room turned toward me, and it always did. Because here's what I've learned. The loudest one in the room isn't always the one being heard. And revenge, the real kind, doesn't need spectacle. It doesn't need vindictive words or raised voices or flashy victories that vanish as fast as they land. The best revenge is composed, it's sustained. It's the kind of shift that redefines the way people see you, and the way they see themselves in your presence. It's the look in someone's eyes when they realize they can't diminish you anymore. It's wearing a thrifted jacket with more dignity than someone else wears couture. It's walking into a room and feeling no need to shrink, not because you're trying to prove you belong, but because you already know you do. Olivia may never say it out loud, but she knows. And I'll never forget that moment when the girl who mocked me for being basic stood 3 feet away and couldn't hold my gaze. That's the kind of silence I live for now. Not revenge, mastery.